The ancient stone corridors of Windsor Castle echoed with the measured footsteps of Sergeant Thomas Whitmore as he began his morning rounds. 23 years of loyal service to the Crown had taught him that every day in royal service brought its own complexities, but nothing could have prepared him for what this particular Tuesday in November would demand of him. Thomas had started his career as a young guardsman, fresh from military training, assigned to the outer perimeters of the royal residences. His dedication and unwavering loyalty had earned him promotions over the years, and now he held one of the most trusted positions in the royal household, personal security for the senior members of the royal family. His assignments required not just physical protection, but an intimate understanding of royal protocol, family dynamics, and the delicate balance of power that existed within the walls of the monarchy's private quarters. The morning briefing had been routine enough. His commanding officer, Colonel James Richardson, had outlined the day's schedule with military precision. Her Majesty Queen Victoria would be attending a private meeting with her ministers in the Blue Drawing Room. The Princess of Wales, Lady Catherine, was scheduled to remain in her private suite due to a recent bout of illness that had kept her from public engagements for the past week. The royal physicians had recommended complete rest, and strict instructions had been given that she was not to be disturbed except for essential matters. Thomas understood the weight of these instructions. In royal households, privacy was not just a courtesy, but a fundamental principle that governed every aspect of daily life. The princess had been under tremendous pressure lately, with constant public scrutiny and demanding royal duties that left little time for personal recovery. Her private suite represented one of the few sanctuaries where she could retreat from the relentless demands of royal life. As he took his position outside the princess's private quarters, Thomas reflected on the complex hierarchy that governed royal protection. Each member of the family had specific protocols, and crossing those lines was not just a breach of etiquette, but potentially a career-ending mistake. The princess's suite was considered her personal domain, and entry was restricted to her personal staff, family members, and only the most senior officials with explicit permission. The corridors around the private quarters were designed with both security and privacy in mind. Heavy oak doors with intricate carvings stood as barriers between the public and private spaces of the castle. Thick Persian rugs muffled footsteps, and the walls were lined with portraits of previous monarchs, their painted eyes seeming to watch over the current generation of royals with silent judgment. Thomas positioned himself at his assigned post, a discreet alcove that provided clear sightlines to all approaches while remaining unobtrusive. His training had taught him to be simultaneously invisible and vigilant, present enough to respond to any threat, but subtle enough to allow the royal family to move about their private spaces without feeling constantly monitored. The morning passed quietly, with only the occasional footstep of household staff going about their duties. The princess's personal lady-in-waiting, Miss Elizabeth Hartwell, had arrived early with breakfast and had emerged an hour later with instructions that the princess was resting and should not be disturbed. This was typical for someone recovering from illness, and Thomas noted the instruction in his mental log. Around mid-morning, Thomas heard the distinctive sound of heels clicking against marble in the distance. The rhythm and pace were familiar. He had learned to recognize the footsteps of different family members and staff over his years of service. These particular footsteps belonged to someone walking with purpose and authority, the kind of determined gait that suggested urgent business. As the sound grew closer, Thomas straightened his posture and prepared to greet whoever was approaching. The role of a royal guard required constant readiness to assess situations, determine appropriate responses, and make split-second decisions that could affect both security and diplomatic relations within the family. The approaching footsteps belonged to Queen Victoria's personal secretary, Lord Pemberton, a thin man in his 50s who had served the royal household for over 2 decades. His face bore the stern expression of someone carrying important instructions, and he moved with the efficient purpose that characterized all senior palace officials. "Sergeant Whitmore," Lord Pemberton addressed him with the formal tone reserved for official business. "Her Majesty requires immediate access to the princess's private suite. There are urgent matters of state that require the princess's immediate attention, regardless of her current condition." Thomas felt a familiar tension arise in his chest. This was exactly the type of situation that tested both his training and his judgment. On one hand, he had explicit instructions from the princess's personal staff and medical team that she was not to be disturbed. On the other hand, he was being given what appeared to be a direct order from the Queen's representative. "Sir," Thomas replied carefully, "I was given specific instructions this morning that the princess is recovering from illness and has requested no visitors." Her lady-in-waiting emphasized that this includes all non-essential business. Lord Pemberton's expression hardened. "Sergeant, I am conveying direct instructions from Her Majesty. Surely you understand that the Queen's wishes supersede any other considerations, including the princess's temporary indisposition." This was where Thomas's years of experience became crucial. He understood that royal protocol was not always as straightforward as it might appear to outsiders. While the Queen certainly held ultimate authority, the reality of royal family dynamics meant that different members of the family often had competing interests and priorities. Moreover, his primary duty was to the safety and well-being of his assigned charge, which in this case was the princess. "Lord Pemberton," Thomas said, maintaining his respectful but firm tone, "I understand the importance of Her Majesty's business, but I must verify these instructions through proper channels. The princess's security and well-being protocols require that any changes to her schedule or visitor access be confirmed through her personal staff." The secretary's face flushed slightly with irritation. "Are you suggesting that you doubt the authenticity of Her Majesty's instructions?" Thomas remained calm, drawing on his military training to maintain composure under pressure. "Not at all, sir. I am following established security protocols that exist to protect all members of the royal family. These protocols exist precisely to prevent any misunderstandings or unauthorized access, regardless of who might be requesting entry." This response highlighted one of the fundamental tensions that existed within royal households: the balance between absolute respect for hierarchy and the independent judgment required for effective security. Guards like Thomas were expected to be both completely obedient and independently thoughtful, able to navigate complex situations where different authorities might give conflicting instructions. Lord Pemberton stepped closer, his voice taking on a more threatening tone. "Sergeant, I would strongly advise you to reconsider your position. Refusing to comply with Her Majesty's direct instructions could be viewed as insubordination of the highest order." Thomas felt the weight of the moment settling around him like a heavy cloak. This was more than just a simple security decision. It was a test of his understanding of royal protocol, his ability to protect his charge, and his capacity to navigate the treacherous waters of palace politics. Every choice he made in the next few minutes could have profound consequences for his career, his relationships within the royal household, and most importantly, for the princess's well-being. He thought about the princess, likely resting in her private chambers, trusting that her security team would protect her from unwanted intrusions during her recovery. He thought about his oath of service, his duty to the crown, and his responsibility to make decisions that served the greater good of the royal family, even when those decisions might not be popular with everyone involved. The corridor suddenly felt much warmer, and Thomas could feel sweat beginning to form under his uniform, despite the cool November air that typically filled the castle. This was the moment when his years of training, his understanding of protocol, and his personal integrity would all be put to the ultimate test. The silence in the corridor stretched between Thomas and Lord Pemberton like a taut wire ready to snap. Thomas could feel the weight of 23 years of unblemished service pressing down on him as he faced what might be the most consequential decision of his career. The ornate grandfather clock at the end of the hallway ticked with mechanical precision, each sound seeming to echo the beating of his own heart. "Lord Pemberton," Thomas said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind, "I request permission to contact Miss Hartwell to inform the princess of Her Majesty's urgent business. This would allow the princess to make her own decision about receiving visitors during her recovery." The secretary's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Sergeant Whitmore, you seem to misunderstand the nature of royal command. When Her Majesty issues an instruction, it is not a request to be filtered through intermediaries or subjected to the convenience of others, regardless of their rank within the family." Thomas understood the implication behind these words. In the complex hierarchy of royal service, questioning the Queen's authority, even indirectly, could be construed as a serious breach of loyalty. Yet his training had also taught him that true loyalty sometimes required making difficult decisions that might not be immediately popular, but served the long-term interests of those he was sworn to protect. "Sir, with all due respect," Thomas replied, "my understanding of royal protocol is that the security and well-being of family members takes precedence over all other considerations, including administrative convenience." The princess's physicians have specifically recommended undisturbed rest, and as her assigned protector, I have a duty to ensure those medical recommendations are followed unless there is a genuine emergency." Lord Pemberton stepped back slightly, clearly surprised by the guard's continued resistance. In his years of service to the Queen, he was accustomed to immediate compliance with royal instructions. The idea that a guard might question or delay the execution of the Queen's wishes was almost unthinkable to him. "Are you seriously suggesting that you know better than Her Majesty what is in the best interests of the royal family?" he asked, his voice rising slightly in indignation. Thomas felt a familiar calm descend over him, the same composed clarity he had experienced during military operations, when clear thinking under pressure meant the difference between success and catastrophe. "Lord Pemberton, I am suggesting that my duty is to protect the princess from all potential harm, including well-intentioned interruptions that might compromise her recovery. If Her Majesty's business is truly urgent, I am certain she would want me to ensure that the princess is in a condition to properly address it." This response revealed Thomas's deep understanding of royal psychology and family dynamics. He knew that Queen Victoria, despite her sometimes imperious manner, genuinely cared about the well-being of family members. By framing his resistance in terms of protecting the princess's ability to serve the Queen effectively, he was appealing to higher principles that even Lord Pemberton would find difficult to argue against. The secretary began pacing in short, agitated steps, clearly frustrated by this unexpected obstacle to what should have been a simple task. "Sergeant, you are placing me in an extremely difficult position. I have been instructed to gain immediate access to the princess, and I cannot return to Her Majesty with explanations about security protocols and medical recommendations." Thomas recognized the genuine distress in Lord Pemberton's voice and felt a moment of sympathy for the man's position. Palace service often meant being caught between competing demands and loyalties, and everyone from the highest officials to the most junior staff occasionally found themselves in impossible situations. "Perhaps," Thomas suggested carefully, "we could arrange for you to speak with Miss Hartwell directly. She could assess the princess's current condition and determine whether she is well enough to address Her Majesty's urgent business. This would satisfy both the need for security protocols and the requirement to respond to royal instructions." Before Lord Pemberton could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the opposite end of the corridor. Both men turned to see Miss Elizabeth Hartwell herself emerging from a side passage, carrying what appeared to be medical supplies and wearing the concerned expression of someone tending to an ill patient. Miss Hartwell was a woman in her 40s who had served the princess for over a decade. She possessed the rare combination of absolute discretion and unwavering dedication that made her invaluable in her role as personal lady-in-waiting. Her presence in the corridor at this moment seemed almost providential. "Sergeant Whitmore, Lord Pemberton." She acknowledged both men with a polite nod, though Thomas could see concern in her eyes as she took in the obvious tension between them. "Is there some matter I can assist with?" Lord Pemberton seized the opportunity immediately. "Miss Hartwell, I have been instructed by Her Majesty to gain immediate access to the princess regarding urgent matters of state. The sergeant here has been unusually cautious about following these instructions." Miss Hartwell glanced at Thomas, and he could see her quick mind assessing the situation. She understood as well as anyone the delicate balance required in royal service, and she could clearly see that Thomas was not being obstructive without good reason. "I see," she said carefully. "Lord Pemberton, I must inform you that the princess has had a particularly difficult night. Her fever broke only a few hours ago, and the royal physician specifically emphasized that any unnecessary stress or exertion could cause a relapse that might keep her from her duties for weeks rather than days." This information changed the dynamic of the conversation significantly. A fever breaking was a crucial stage in recovery, and everyone present understood that disturbing someone at this critical point could indeed cause serious setbacks. Thomas felt a sense of vindication but was careful not to show it. His instincts about protecting the princess's recovery had been correct, and now he had medical backing for his position. Lord Pemberton's expression showed his growing frustration with the situation. "Miss Hartwell, surely you understand that matters of state cannot wait for the perfect moment. The Queen's business is urgent, and delays could have serious consequences." Miss Hartwell nodded sympathetically. "Of course, I understand the importance of Her Majesty's business. Perhaps you could provide me with some details about the nature of the urgent matter."
If it truly cannot wait, I might be able to wake the princess briefly, though I would strongly recommend against it unless absolutely necessary." This was a masterful response that showed Miss Hartwell's diplomatic skills. She was not refusing the request, but requiring Lord Pemberton to justify the urgency against the medical risks, thereby placing the responsibility for any negative consequences squarely on his shoulders. Lord Pemberton hesitated for the first time in the conversation. Thomas could see him weighing the political risks of either choice, returning to the Queen empty-handed or potentially being responsible for a serious relapse in the princess's health. The matter involves diplomatic correspondence that requires the princess's immediate review and response, he said finally, though his tone lacked the confident authority he had displayed earlier. Miss Hartwell exchanged a quick glance with Thomas. Both experienced palace staff members recognized the vague nature of this description and understood that truly urgent state business would typically be described in more specific and compelling terms. "Lord Pemberton," Miss Hartwell said gently, "would it be possible for you to review this correspondence with me first, if it is something that could be addressed in writing, or delayed until the princess is fully recovered? That might serve everyone's interests better." The secretary's face reddened slightly. "Miss Hartwell, I hardly think it appropriate for me to discuss confidential state business with anyone other than the princess herself." Thomas noted the defensive tone and recognized it as a sign that Lord Pemberton's position might not be as strong as he had initially claimed. Truly urgent royal business typically came with clear documentation and unambiguous authority that left little room for interpretation or resistance. The tension in the corridor had reached a breaking point when the distant sound of military boots echoed through the castle's ancient halls. Thomas recognized the measured pace immediately. Colonel Richardson was approaching. As his commanding officer, the colonel's arrival could either resolve the situation or escalate it to levels that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Colonel James Richardson appeared around the corner with the bearing of a man who had spent 40 years navigating both military command and royal protocol. His weathered face showed no emotion as he took in the scene before him. His sergeant, the Queen's secretary, and the princess's lady-in-waiting locked in what was clearly a significant disagreement. "Sergeant Whitmore," the colonel said in his characteristic measured tone, "I received word that there might be some confusion regarding access protocols. Perhaps you could brief me on the current situation." Thomas straightened to attention, grateful for his commanding officer's diplomatic approach. "Sir, Lord Pemberton has requested immediate access to the princess's private suite on behalf of Her Majesty. I have been following established security protocols that require verification through the princess's personal staff, particularly given the medical restrictions currently in place." Colonel Richardson nodded slowly, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the confrontation. He had seen similar situations before, where competing authorities within the royal household created friction that required careful resolution. His role was not just to command the security forces, but to serve as a buffer between different factions within the palace hierarchy. "Lord Pemberton," the colonel addressed the secretary with formal courtesy, "I trust you have the appropriate documentation for this request. As you know, access to private royal quarters requires specific authorization protocols, particularly when medical restrictions are in place." This question cut to the heart of the matter. Thomas watched as Lord Pemberton's confident demeanor wavered slightly. Proper royal instructions typically came with written authorization, official seals, and clear documentation that left no room for interpretation. "Colonel Richardson," Lord Pemberton replied, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty for the first time, "I was given verbal instructions by Her Majesty this morning." The urgent nature of the business did not allow time for formal documentation. Miss Hartwell stepped forward slightly. "Colonel, if I may, the princess's physician left very specific instructions about her recovery. She experienced a significant fever last night, and any unnecessary stress could cause a serious relapse. Perhaps we could arrange for the princess to address Her Majesty's business once she has had proper rest." Colonel Richardson's expression remained neutral, but Thomas could see his mind working through the various implications of the situation. As a military man, he understood the importance of following orders, but his years in royal service had also taught him that protecting the royal family sometimes required questioning suspicious or potentially harmful instructions. "Miss Hartwell," the colonel said thoughtfully,
What is your assessment of the princess's current condition?
Would she be capable of making her own decision about receiving visitors if the matter is truly urgent? This was a clever approach that placed the decision back with the princess herself while ensuring that she had all the relevant information to make an informed choice. She could be awakened, Miss Hartwell replied carefully, but I would strongly recommend against it unless the matter truly cannot wait. She has had very little rest, and her recovery is at a critical stage. Thomas watched as Colonel Richardson processed this information. He could see his commanding officer weighing multiple factors: the princess's health, the claimed urgency of royal business, the unusual nature of Lord Pemberton's request, and the broader implications for royal security protocols. Lord Pemberton, the colonel said finally, I think it would be appropriate for us to verify these instructions with Her Majesty directly.
This would ensure that we are following her wishes precisely and that the princess receives proper preparation for whatever urgent matter requires her attention. The secretary's reaction was immediate and telling.
His face paled slightly, and Thomas could see genuine panic in his eyes for the first time in their conversation.
Colonel, surely that would be an unnecessary delay, Lord Pemberton protested. Her Majesty is currently in meetings with her ministers, and she specifically emphasized the urgent nature of this matter. Thomas felt his suspicions crystallizing. In his experience, legitimate urgent royal business came with clear authority and specific details. The vague nature of Lord Pemberton's explanations and his obvious reluctance to verify the instructions were raising serious red flags. Colonel Richardson's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Lord Pemberton, in matters involving the security and well-being of royal family members, there is no such thing as unnecessary verification. If Her Majesty's business is truly urgent, she will understand the need to confirm instructions, particularly when they involve overriding medical recommendations. The confrontation was interrupted by the approach of another figure, Dr. William Ashworth, the royal physician responsible for the princess's care. His arrival seemed to be providential timing, as he carried the authority to speak definitively about the medical aspects of the situation. Miss Hartwell, Dr. Femis Art, Ashworth addressed the lady-in-waiting with professional concern. I heard there might be some question about disturbing the princess this morning. I hope everyone understands that her recovery is at a very delicate stage. Colonel Richardson seized the opportunity. Doctor, could you please explain to Lord Pemberton the medical implications of disturbing the princess's rest at this point in her recovery? Dr. Ashworth turned to address the secretary with the grave manner that medical professionals reserve for serious matters. Lord Pemberton, the princess has been fighting a severe fever for 3 days. It broke only this morning, which means her body is still in recovery mode. Any significant stress or exertion at this point could cause the fever to return, potentially leading to complications that could keep her bedridden for weeks. This medical assessment provided the objective support that Thomas had been hoping for. It wasn't just a matter of convenience or protocol. There were genuine health risks involved in forcing the princess to engage with urgent business while she was still recovering. Furthermore, Dr. Ashworth continued, the medications she is taking for her recovery can affect cognitive function. Even if she were awakened, she might not be in a condition to properly address matters of state significance. Lord Pemberton's position was becoming increasingly untenable. The medical evidence, combined with Colonel Richardson's insistence on verification, had created a situation where his claimed urgent business was being scrutinized from multiple angles. Perhaps, Thomas suggested carefully, Lord Pemberton could provide us with more specific details about the nature of this urgent matter. If we understood exactly what Her Majesty needs from the princess, we might be able to find an alternative solution that doesn't compromise her recovery. This suggestion pushed Lord Pemberton into an even tighter corner. Thomas could see him calculating whether to provide more details about his supposed instructions or to retreat from his demands entirely. The secretary looked around at the assembled group, Colonel Richardson with his military authority, Dr. J. Ashworth with his medical expertise, Miss Hartwell with her intimate knowledge of the princess's condition, and Thomas himself with his unwavering commitment to his duty. He was clearly outnumbered by people who had both the authority and the expertise to challenge his claims. I may have misunderstood the urgency of Her Majesty's request, Lord Pemberton said finally.
his voice much quieter than it had been at the beginning of their confrontation. "Perhaps it would be appropriate to wait until the princess has recovered sufficiently to address the matter properly." Colonel Richardson nodded gravely. "I think that would be the wisest course of action. In the meantime, I believe it would be appropriate for me to have a conversation with Her Majesty's private secretary to ensure that we have clear protocols for handling such situations in the future." Thomas felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. His decision to stand firm on protocol had been vindicated, and the princess's recovery would continue undisturbed. More importantly, the incident had revealed potential weaknesses in the communication channels between different parts of the royal household that would need to be addressed. As Lord Pemberton retreated down the corridor with considerably less confidence than he had arrived with, Colonel Richardson gestured for Thomas to follow him to a private alcove away from the princess's quarters. The colonel's expression had grown increasingly serious throughout the confrontation, and Thomas could sense that his commanding officer had concerns that extended beyond the immediate situation. "Sergeant Whitmore," the colonel said in a low voice once they were out of earshot of the others, "I want you to walk me through exactly how Lord Pemberton approached you this morning. Every detail, no matter how seemingly insignificant." Thomas recognized the tone. It was the same one Colonel Richardson had used during security investigations in the past. His commanding officer clearly suspected that something more complex was happening than a simple miscommunication about royal instructions. "Sir, he arrived approximately 45 minutes ago," Thomas began, reconstructing the encounter in his mind. His manner was authoritative, but when I questioned the instructions, he became defensive rather than providing additional verification. Most significantly, when you suggested contacting Her Majesty directly, he seemed genuinely alarmed rather than simply concerned about delays. Colonel Richardson nodded thoughtfully. "In your experience with royal protocol, how would genuine urgent instructions from Her Majesty typically be conveyed?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "Sir, in my experience, truly urgent royal business comes with written authorization, specific details about the nature of the urgency, and usually involves multiple members of the Queen's staff to ensure proper execution. Lord Pemberton was acting alone and seemed reluctant to provide specifics." The colonel's expression darkened. "Sergeant, I'm going to share some information with you that must remain strictly confidential. There have been some concerns recently about unauthorized access attempts to various royal quarters. The security office has been investigating several incidents where staff members have been approached with suspicious requests that seem to have official authorization." This revelation cast Lord Pemberton's behavior in an entirely new light. Thomas felt a chill as he realized that he might have been the target of something far more serious than a simple protocol dispute. "Sir, are you suggesting that Lord Pemberton's request might not have been legitimate?" Colonel Richardson was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing how much information to share.
"I'm suggesting that we need to investigate this matter thoroughly."
"Your instincts to follow protocol may have prevented something more serious than a disrupted recovery." The implications of this possibility were staggering. If someone was attempting to gain unauthorized access to royal quarters, the security breach could have consequences far beyond the immediate incident. Thomas thought about the princess, alone and vulnerable in her private suite, trusting that her security team would protect her from any potential threats. "What would you like me to do, sir?" "Continue your duties as normal, but I want you to document everything about this morning's encounter in detail. I'm going to have a conversation with Her Majesty's actual private secretary to verify whether any instructions were given regarding the princess today." As Colonel Richardson departed on his investigative mission, Thomas returned to his post with a heightened sense of alertness. The quiet corridors that had seemed routine earlier now felt charged with potential danger. Every footstep, every shadow seemed to require additional scrutiny. Miss Hartwell approached him as he resumed his position. Her expression showed that she too had been affected by the morning's strange encounter. "Sergeant Whitmore," she said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for protecting the princess's recovery time. However, I'm curious, in your professional judgment, did Lord Pemberton's behavior seem unusual to you?" Thomas appreciated her diplomatic phrasing. Miss Hartwell was clearly intelligent enough to have noticed the same inconsistencies that had troubled him, but she was being careful not to make direct accusations against a senior palace official. "Miss Hartwell,
I would say that his approach differed from standard protocol for conveying urgent royal instructions. Colonel Richardson is looking into the matter to ensure that we have clear communication channels for future situations. She nodded, understanding. I see. Well, I think it's important that you know. The princess specifically mentioned this morning that she was grateful for the protection her security team provides. She values being able to recover in peace, knowing that her privacy and well-being are being carefully guarded. This comment revealed something important about the princess's awareness of the security arrangements around her. Unlike some members of royal families who might view guards as intrusive necessities, she clearly understood and appreciated the complex decisions that her security team made on her behalf. The afternoon passed quietly, but Thomas remained on high alert. Around 3 o'clock, Colonel Richardson returned with Dr. Sisso. Ashworth and another man Thomas didn't recognize. A thin, serious-looking individual, wearing the discreet attire of a senior palace official. Sergeant Whitmore, Colonel Richardson called him over. I'd like you to meet Mr. Charles Pembroke, Her Majesty's actual private secretary. Mr. Pembroke, this is the sergeant who handled this morning's situation. Mr. Pembroke extended his hand with the grave courtesy of a man dealing with serious business. Sergeant, Colonel Richardson has briefed me on this morning's events. I want to assure you that no instructions were given by Her Majesty regarding access to the princess's quarters today. In fact, Her Majesty specifically inquired about the princess's recovery this morning and expressed her hope that she would have uninterrupted rest. Thomas felt his blood run cold. The confirmation that Lord Pemberton's claims were false meant that someone had deliberately attempted to gain unauthorized access to the princess's private quarters using fabricated authority. Furthermore, Mr. Pembroke continued, we have been unable to locate Lord Pemberton anywhere in the palace. He seems to have departed immediately after your encounter this morning, which raises additional concerns about his intentions. Dr. Ashworth stepped forward with obvious concern. Gentlemen, I think it's important to understand what could have happened if the princess had been disturbed during this critical stage of her recovery, particularly if the encounter had been stressful or threatening. The combination of her current medications and her weakened state could have made her particularly vulnerable to any form of distress. The medical perspective added another layer of seriousness to the situation. Not only had someone attempted unauthorized access, but they had chosen a time when the princess would have been least able to defend herself or call for help effectively. Colonel Richardson's expression was grim. Sergeant, I want you to know that your decision to follow protocol this morning may have prevented a serious security breach. We're treating this as a potential threat to royal safety, and there will be a full investigation. Thomas felt a complex mixture of emotions, relief that his instincts had been correct, pride that his training had served him well, but also a deep concern about what might have happened if he had been less experienced or more easily intimidated by claims of royal authority. Sir, what additional security measures should we implement to prevent similar attempts in the future? Mr. Pembroke answered this question. We're immediately implementing new verification protocols for all access requests to private royal quarters. No verbal instructions will be accepted without written confirmation, and all staff members will be reminded of the proper channels for conveying urgent royal business. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Miss Hartwell, who approached the group with obvious urgency. Gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting, but I thought you should know. The princess is awake and feeling much better. When I mentioned that there had been some confusion about visitors this morning, she asked to speak with Sergeant Whitmore personally. Thomas had never been summoned for a personal audience with the princess during his years of service. His role was designed to be protective, but invisible, ensuring security while maintaining the privacy that made royal family life possible. As Miss Hartwell led him through the antechamber toward the princess's private sitting room, he felt the weight of the morning's events settling into a new understanding of his responsibilities. The princess's private sitting room was elegant but comfortable, designed for relaxation rather than formal audiences. Princess Catherine sat in a chair by the window, wrapped in a blue silk robe, her complexion still pale from her recent illness but her eyes alert and intelligent. Despite her weakened condition, she radiated the quiet authority that came naturally to senior members of the royal family. Sergeant Whitmore, she said as he entered and bowed formally. Please, sit down. I understand that you had quite an unusual morning defending my privacy. Thomas remained standing as protocol dictated. Your Royal Highness, I was simply following established security procedures. Your recovery and well-being are my primary responsibility." The princess smiled slightly, an expression that conveyed both appreciation and understanding. "Miss Hartwell has explained the situation to me, and Colonel Richardson has briefed me on the broader security concerns that your actions may have prevented. I wanted to speak with you personally because I think it's important that you understand the full significance of the decision you made this morning." She gestured toward a chair again. "Please, Sergeant, sit down. What I have to say is important, and I want you to be comfortable while we discuss it." Thomas carefully took the offered seat, maintaining his formal posture while trying to prepare himself for whatever the princess wanted to tell him. "Sergeant Whitmore," the princess began, "in royal service we often ask people to make decisions that balance competing loyalties and responsibilities. This morning you were faced with someone claiming royal authority demanding access to my private quarters, and you chose to protect my recovery, despite potential consequences to your career. That kind of judgment cannot be taught. It comes from character and experience." Thomas felt humbled by her words. "Your Royal Highness, my training taught me that the security and well-being of the royal family must always be the primary consideration, regardless of other pressures." Yes, the princess nodded, but training alone wouldn't have been enough in this situation. Someone with less experience might have been intimidated by claims of royal authority. Someone with less integrity might have chosen the path that seemed safest for their own career. You chose the path that was right, even though it was difficult. The princess paused, looking out the window at the castle grounds where Thomas could see gardeners working in the distance, maintaining the beauty and order that surrounded royal life. "What you may not realize," she continued, "is that your decision this morning protected more than just my recovery time. Colonel Richardson and Mr. Pembroke have explained that we may have been dealing with someone attempting unauthorized access for unknown purposes. Your refusal to be intimidated may have prevented something far more serious than a disrupted rest." This perspective had occurred to Thomas during the afternoon, but hearing it confirmed by the princess herself made the morning's events feel even more significant. He had been prepared to face career consequences for following his instincts, but instead he had apparently helped prevent a potential security breach. Furthermore, the princess added, "Your handling of the situation demonstrated the kind of thoughtful security approach that makes it possible for members of the royal family to feel safe in our private spaces. Knowing that our security team will make principled decisions under pressure, rather than simply following orders without question, gives us confidence in our daily lives." Thomas was beginning to understand that this conversation was about more than just gratitude for the morning's events. The princess was explaining the broader philosophy of royal security and his role within it. "Your Royal Highness, I hope you know that your safety and well-being will always be my highest priority. This morning's situation simply reinforced my commitment to that responsibility." The princess leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "Sergeant Whitmore, I want you to understand that protecting the royal family sometimes requires making decisions that others might not understand or appreciate. There will be times when doing the right thing is not the popular thing, and there will be situations where your judgment is all that stands between us and potential harm." She stood and walked to a small desk, retrieving an envelope with the royal seal. "Colonel Richardson and I have discussed your performance this morning, and we believe that your actions warrant formal recognition. This commendation will be placed in your permanent service record, acknowledging both your exemplary judgment and your dedication to royal security." Thomas rose and accepted the envelope with deep appreciation. In his years of service, he had received routine recognition for his duties, but a personal commendation from a member of the royal family was an extraordinary honor that would mark the pinnacle of his career. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. I am honored by your confidence in my service." The princess returned to her chair, but her expression remained serious. "There is one more matter I want to discuss with you. The investigation into this morning's events is ongoing, and it may reveal security vulnerabilities that extend beyond today's incident. Colonel Richardson has recommended you for additional responsibilities in reviewing and improving our personal security protocols." This announcement was unexpected but welcome. Thomas had always taken pride in his understanding of security procedures, and the opportunity to contribute to their improvement would be both challenging and rewarding. "I would be honored to contribute to any efforts to enhance royal security, Your Royal Highness." "Good," the princess smiled, "because the role would involve working directly with family members to understand their daily routines, security concerns, and privacy needs. It requires someone with both excellent judgment and absolute discretion,
qualities you demonstrated admirably this morning." As their conversation drew to a close, Thomas felt a profound sense of satisfaction about his career choice and his performance that day. The morning's difficult decision had not only been vindicated but had opened new opportunities for service that he could never have imagined when he first became a royal guard. The princess stood, indicating that the audience was concluding. "Sergeant Whitmore, I want you to know that your service this morning exemplified the highest ideals of royal protection. You protected not just my physical safety, but my dignity, my recovery, and potentially my family's security. That is exactly the kind of dedication and judgment we need from the people we trust with our most private moments." As Thomas bowed and prepared to leave, the princess added one final comment that would stay with him for the rest of his career. "Remember, Sergeant, true loyalty sometimes requires having the courage to say no to the wrong requests so that you can say yes to the right responsibilities. Thank you for having that courage today." Walking back to his post through the castle corridors, Thomas reflected on the extraordinary day that had tested his training, his judgment, and his character. What had begun as a routine morning shift had become a defining moment in his career, demonstrating that even the most experienced professionals must sometimes rely on their instincts and principles when faced with unprecedented situations. The incident would indeed lead to significant improvements in royal security protocols, and Thomas would play a key role in implementing those changes. But more importantly, it had reaffirmed his understanding that protecting the royal family meant more than just physical security. It meant preserving their ability to live with dignity, privacy, and trust in the people sworn to serve them. As evening approached and the castle settled into its quiet nighttime routine, Thomas took his place at his post with renewed purpose and confidence, knowing that his dedication to principled service had been tested and proven worthy of the trust placed in him by the crown.